I always loved camping, the solitude, the serenity, the escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So when I had a chance to take a long weekend, I decided to explore a forest I'd never been to before. It was off the beaten path, a place few people knew about, perfect for getting away from everything, or so I thought. The first day was uneventful. I set up my tent in a small clearing, built a fire, and enjoyed the quiet. The forest was beautiful, untouched by civilization, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. As night fell, I settled into my sleeping bag, looking forward to a restful night under the stars. I woke up in the middle of the night to an odd sound. It was a whisper, faint and barely audible. I thought it was the wind at first, rustling through the trees, but it had a rhythmic, almost deliberate quality to it. I sat up, my eyes straining to see in the darkness. The whispering continued, growing slightly louder. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it outside the tent, but there was nothing there. The forest was still, eerily so. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and went back to sleep. The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest. The trees were dense and the underbrush was thick, making it hard to navigate. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I would hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. I found a small stream and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead me to something interesting. About an hour later, I stumbled upon an old campsite. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The tent was tattered and overgrown with moss, and there were remnants of a fire pit. As I looked around, I found a journal half buried in the dirt. The entries were frantic, detailing the writer's growing fear of something in the forest. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. The forest watches. It sees everything. I can feel its eyes on me. Unease settled over me, but I brushed it off and headed back to my campsite. That night, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent. It seemed to come from all around me, echoing through the trees. I tried to ignore it, but sleep was impossible. Every rustle, every creak of the branches, set my nerves on edge. The following day, I decided it was time to leave. The forest, once beautiful and serene, now felt oppressive and malevolent. As I packed up my things, I heard a low growl coming from the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl was followed by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the forest, but all I could see were shadows. Panic set in, and I started to make my way back to the trailhead. The footsteps followed me, always just out of sight. I quickened my pace, but no matter how fast I went, the footsteps kept pace. The whispering returned, louder than ever, filling my ears with a cacophony of voices. They seemed to be speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but their tone was menacing. As the sun began to set, I realized I was lost. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees forming an impenetrable wall. The whispering grew louder, and I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move. Desperation took over, and I started to run, not caring which direction I went as long as I could get away from the voices. I stumbled into another clearing, this one devoid of life. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. In the center of the clearing was an old stone altar, covered in moss and lichen. The whispering reached a fever pitch, and I could see shadows moving around the altar. Shapes that were not quite human, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I backed away, but my foot caught on a root, and I fell hard to the ground. The shadows moved closer, and I could feel their cold breath on my skin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispering filled my mind, drowning out all other thoughts. The last thing I remember before blacking out was a figure standing over me, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. I woke up at the edge of the forest, the sun rising in the distance. I had no idea how I got there or how long I had been unconscious. My body ached and my mind was foggy. I stumbled to my car and drove away as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I never went back to that forest, and I never will. The memory of those whispers, those eyes, haunts me to this day. Whatever lives in that forest, it is not of this world. It watches, it waits, and it feeds on fear. If you ever find yourself in a place where the trees seem to whisper and the shadows move on their own, turn back. Some places are better left undisturbed,